You're saying Socrates is a real person. I'm saying Jesus Christ is a real person.
Yeah.
Criteria by criteria, what is your criteria to say that
both
Socrates
be
is alive?
There is a lot more evidence for Jesus if you just move
No,
things
Jesus got Ben Gamala. You said that he's the one talked about here. Show me. If Jesus was a real person, then your whole view of history is wrong. Agreed? If Jesus is a real person, is your view of history wrong? So Christians' logic is this. To see the truth behind the evidence, we have to think in a more spiritual, archetypal way. You know what I heard was subjective belief, subjective belief, subjective belief. So the attestation of the scholars.
Right.
Dr. Bart Ehrman is not a Christian.
No,
He says Dr. Bart Ehrman is not a Christian.
Hey, Captain.
So he's got nothing to gain out of this. And he says that one second, let me finish. Dr. Bart Ehrman states that the crucifixion is one of the most certain facts in history. His opinion is also the mainstream opinion of all scholarship about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Dr. Bruce Metzger, who was the tutor to Dr. Bart Ehrman, says the same. So does many other historians and scholars. Doesn't matter. One second. My point to you. You haven't heard my point. You haven't heard my point. You haven't heard my point.
I just don't want.
You haven't heard my
point.
point. You haven't heard my point. You haven't heard my point. The point that I'm making to you is that scholarship, the mainstream of scholarship, is certain that Jesus was a real person. So for you to say, in your humble opinion, that all of these scholars are wrong and that you're right, you've got to have something really strong to do that. Now I'm open to hearing that, so what is the strong argument to say all of these scholars are wrong and you're correct?
Okay. And what I want to say is that when you consider the 1st century AD, what you're looking at is 100 years where no one was really sure where the zero was. If you take into account that no one at the time really understood who Jesus Christ was, because he's this fellow, as far as I'm concerned, you're looking at a mythological kind of creature from all around the world who is the hero. It's the hero story. It's the saviour God, the resurrected, Sun King. There's so much solar iconography around the Christian religion. It's really hard to not acknowledge it. There are even 1st century zodiacs with Christ in the middle, and you can find them across the Levant. And they're there in Persia as well. There's this interest here in seeing Christ as I do, as a parable, as a set of stories that have been told many, many times across the world, and this saviour deity and all of the miracles attributed to Jesus Christ, that they didn't happen, I think is a fair thing to say.
Well, one second. So hold on.
Let me
remember the question that I'm asking you is about you're going to overturn universal scholarship, and I want to hear your reason for.
Only a few of those. What am I calling them? These attestations that Jesus existed. Only a few of them are actually, you're able to look at them and say, yes, what is this about? There clearly seems to be a Jesus or a Christus or a Christos, but who is he? And is he the character that the Bible purports that he is? Now, as I said, there's a huge difficulty because you have 50 or 60 years sometimes before the possible first gospel actually comes along, and even then it's not in the form you see it today. You know what I'm saying?
I'm sorry, but wait a second. We've already addressed this point, which you didn't reply to, which is if you're going to make the argument that Christ is not a real person because the Gospels came late, then we cannot know about Socrates, we can't know about Plato, we can't know about Aristotle, we can't know about Cleopatra, we can't know about Julius Caesar, we can't know about Julius Africanus, we can't know about anyone from history.
That we can much more reliably
based on, okay, do it. Use Socrates as your example. What's your example? What's your example that Socrates lived?
From the time there will be people that talked about
People that talked about him, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
right.
Paul.
People who, well, this is the thing. I don't think there's anything really talking about who is Mark, who is Matthew.
Archaeology. You mean things like the fact that we see the tombs, or
have-
books like Matthew, Mark, Luke,
I
and
don't think
Paul.
we can,
Matthew, Mark,
can we
Luke, and
find
John.
tombs of Matthew, Mark.
No, my point is, you said archaeology. What is your evidence that Socrates lived?
Socrates lived. Well, a lot of people talk about him.
A lot of people
And-
talk about Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
What
And
is your evidence that
here's the deal,
Socrates lived?
I believe Socrates lived because you have a number of different ways to look back into Greek
Great.
society.
Let's convince me
you can,
Socrates lived.
You can be sure that, say, Miletus existed. You can be
Convince me
sure
that Socrates
other
lived.
people were talking about
Can
Socrates.
you convince me? So other people were talking
Yeah,
about Jesus. Your criteria has been met. Jesus
Right.
is a real person.
I do. I don't. So people have taken
What
is
is
it,
your
Alexander the Great
criteria?
as the criterion.
What is
and
your
they don't
criteria?
realise that there's
What
a
is
lot
your
more
criteria that Socrates lived? People talk, so far you've given me one. Other people talked about him. Well, other people
There are,
talked
as
about
you say,
Jesus.
we
So your
have
criteria is
chronological
met. Jesus was a real person in history.
Contemporary evidence.
Contemporary.
We have-
What is the contemporary evidence about
We
Socrates?
have archaeological evidence.
Oh, what's the archaeological evidence?
Of, for what? We'd have to go back. I'm not an historian.
Shall I tell you?
in
Shall I
this
tell you what?
sense,
Shall
but
I tell you
can-
what actually we have?
We can have.
We have-
can look
we
back
have-
and we can
we have
talk
nothing.
about mainstream history.
No,
and
bro.
we can establish
This is
whether or not someone was likely to.
what you're
have
doing is
existed.
you are making
But-
things up. Literally, you are making things up.
Can you not see that some of the miracles Jesus
you're
might
making
have
you're
performed
making
might
things
not-
up.
Right.
You're making things up right now to sustain a worldview that is collapsing in the
You're
face of the
arguing
evidence.
from a point,
One second.
using a logical fallacy. And
The
saying
reason-
that, no,
the reason-
because this must have been the case over here,
Bro,
and then it can't be the
I
case
asked
over
you.
here as well.
I'm going to ask you again because you're not registering it.
Right.
So let's do it again.
Okay.
What is the criteria? One by one, we'll go through them one by one. What is your criteria that Socrates lived?
Okay. Socrates, as I say, I'm
First
not.
criteria.
I'm a lot of people, and certainly people like Plato's. His work survived, and he records an event,
We're
a very
about to be
specific,
stopped.
a very specific
Let's
event.
let's walk to that.
Shall we?
Let's walk to.
I was just having a one-to-one conversation with this guy.
I don't know who these.
I don't
guys
know
are,
who these
yeah.
people are. I don't know him. Just following around with camera.
You well?
I'm well. How are you? How's your leg?
Aches and pains.
You want us to
1 meter
disperse?
away.
No,
One
no,
meter.
just,
Stand apart.
just keep good distancing.
Yeah.
Just be mindful what the government instructions about social distancing.
Yeah.
The caveat is because we're being monitored heavily about the amount of people coming into the parks, ignoring these instructions, especially more at Kensington Gardens.
Yeah.
It's a real health problem. It's highly likely you may see in the very near future the parks will be closing.
Fair enough.
So
Yeah.
again, I don't want to say don't do this, but it doesn't help by keeping the parks open for everybody else who are keeping it distant.
Yeah.
Does
I
that
mean,
make
if you
sense?
want, we can go onto the grass if that helps. Yeah? Will that help? Right, let's
Right.
go onto the
Is
grass.
that- Most important thing, stay safe and
I just.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, officer.
I'm going to finish this up, and then I'll.
look.
Yeah, so
Can I,
One second, we said Socrates.
Do a little research
We're
and
gonna
then show you exactly.
bro,
the-
like you're not going to get away from a point just by talking over it. One point at a time. So here's my point. You said Jesus Christ wasn't a real person.
Right.
I'm saying
what I do.
Socrates wasn't a real person.
The
You're saying
biblical
Socrates
Christ.
is a real person. I'm saying Jesus Christ is a real person. Criteria by criteria, what is your criteria
And we
to
might
say that
both be
Socrates
wrong.
is
We
alive?
might both be right. We might both.
By the
be
way,
wrong,
I do
right?
believe in Socrates.
Yeah, sure. I think that
Shall we
there's just
sit?
not enough. Yeah, sure. I just don't think there's very much evidence for Jesus.
No, you've not
based
answered my
upon
question, bro.
we've got,
Come
right?
on. What
and
is
here's
your
the deal.
criteria
Jesus
that
Christ
Socrates
is,
lived?
as you would probably agree, is a more important person to a lot of people.
What is
Because
your
Socrates is just
evidence
an historian
that
and a
Socrates lived?
Don't make me heckle.
What's your
Socrates-
criteria that Socrates lived?
What I know of is that Plato wrote a lot about him.
Right, stop. Hold on.
And-
1 second, bro. Hold on 1
Plato
second.
novel.
You've just given a criteria. The criteria
Yeah.
is that Plato wrote about Socrates, so we know that Socrates lived.
Yeah.
Right, well,
I hear
Paul wrote about Jesus,
Yeah.
Mark wrote about Jesus,
Yeah.
John wrote about Jesus. One second,
wait.
Luke
Jesus
wrote
is
about
right.
Jesus. One second.
1 second.
Luke wrote about Jesus. John wrote about Jesus. So I have 5 authors that wrote that Jesus lived. You have one author that wrote that Socrates lived. Now I accept your
And
criteria.
Socrates
One
was
second. Can you just
the head
can
of
you
religion.
can you
Be
just
patient, be
handle the
patient.
point that's being presented to you? You have just said that the criteria is that someone else wrote about them.
Yeah, you said
I
that.
have got 5 authors that write about Jesus. You have one that writes about Socrates.
I can only
So
think of
I
one
have
off the top of my
more
head.
evidence that Jesus lived using your criteria than you do that Socrates lived using your criteria.
There are, as far as I'm aware, and I will grant you that for the sake of this argument, you might be right, and you can extend this logic out and say, yeah, maybe Christian is wrong here. But I don't think it's really fair to equate these two things and say that they're absolutely the same. There's Socrates, there's a lot of people and a lot of references to Socrates from other authors and so on.
Name
There's
them.
even a massive court case where Socrates is, and it's a beautiful case, right? And Plato says specifically this stuff happened. Of course, then Socrates has that little hemlock cocktail at the end of that ordeal.
Can I
And it's
can I address your point?
Yeah,
You're
go on,
talking about a court case. There's a court case registered in the Gospels, the trial of Jesus Christ. Right, but neither is the trial of Socrates. Neither is the trial of Socrates. So your criteria, you fail again. Your criteria is now you've said that the criteria is, well, it's not written in Roman records. Well, I'm sorry, but neither is the trial of Socrates written in Roman records. It isn't the fact that Roman records decide who lives and who didn't live in history.
Do you think if someone
What I would suggest to you is that if a real person inspires a community, yeah, right, then people are more likely to write about him. Would you agree?
People didn't know anything about Jesus at the time. But this is the problem. We have no contemporary evidence, no archaeological evidence for a Jesus in the time. At the
Sorry,
time.
where is your contemporary evidence that Socrates lived?
I get what you're saying. I understand.
So you're saying is
What you can say is,
So you're saying that my
this guy,
principle
Socrates,
applies.
lived
My
around-
principle.
To me.
My principle applies when I want to apply it, but it doesn't apply when I want to apply it. That's an inconsistent
That's
principle.
inconsistent.
It is an acknowledgement here that I think, and it's true, absolutely. If you're going to use your logic,
No, I'm using
it's
your logic.
potentially true.
This is
No,
your
that's your logic,
criteria.
that's it.
I haven't
Potentially
laid my
true. It's
criteria down.
potentially okay
I did
to
it
do
before the
that.
camera
Yeah.
arrived, but you
What
ignored it.
What we're talking about here in Jesus' life is someone who was really moving mountains, who did a hell of a lot of stuff in a pretty short space of time, who gathered, who had thousands of people around him. And they were
So is he a
following
real
him.
person?
He was curing the blind.
Was he a real
He
person?
was turning 2 fishes and 5 loaves into enough to feed 1,000 to
That's
2,000
good,
people, something like that. And you don't have any references to his life.
But you do.
And
I
what
gave them
what
to you.
have
I gave
here
them to you.
is
No, hold on one
a
second. You've just made a statement that is a
of
lie. You've just
sorry,
lied, bro.
Which one? Which?
Your lie is this. Your lie is this. We have no one writing about the life of Jesus. Paul wrote about the life of Jesus.
After he
John
lived,
wrote about the life of
after he
Jesus.
lived decades after.
Again, your principle, you take it and you leave it as you want to, because we've just seen that by your logic you can't prove Socrates
We
lived.
do this with-
One
with
second.
Muslims
One
a lot,
second.
but
You
talk about,
one second.
Muhammad.
Listen,
how-
listen, bro.
Listen.
Right.
I'm really enjoying this, and dude,
Yeah, but
love
bro,
your-
you know
I
what?
love
You know
your
what really
talking.
pains me. You know what really pains
You
me
need to engage.
is when I see a man who has constructed a worldview on straw.
Right.
And when that worldview is challenged, and even the inconsistencies of his own criteria are being laid out in front of him, his pride is such that he would rather hold on to his myths than simply accept that his logic is flawed.
I think-
You have said that we know that Socrates lived because other people wrote about him, and you mentioned Plato. then I mentioned not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, but 7 different people that wrote about Jesus Christ. I referenced Josephus, I referenced Tacitus, I referenced Paul, I referenced John, I referenced Luke, I referenced Matthew, I referenced Mark. All of these authors speak about Jesus, and the point that I'm making is, you're saying that if someone else wrote about Socrates, Plato, that therefore Socrates lived. I'm saying that 7 people wrote about Jesus, so therefore by your criteria, Jesus lived. Now show me how I am being unfair.
You were making an assumption
about Socrates.
That 5 or 6 people speaking decades after Jesus Christ.
How long did Plato live after Socrates?
Jesus or Joshua.
Deal with that. Yeah.
Quite a common name in the ADs, right? Joshua was I think at once 1 in every 21 people were called Joshua back in the ADs. It's quite a common name. And Christus is a title. It's not. Jesus Christ is a title. Christ is a title. Christ. The Gnostics have this notion that Christ is in us, and this is where we listen to Jesus, the figure, whatever he is in the Bible, and we listen when he says Christ is within you, because that is the Gnostic interpretation.
Bro, you're just trying to push your theology. You're not actually dealing with the argument.
What I want to say is, there are about 5, maybe 7 people who were talking in the 2nd century about Jesus Christ, but they are very fleeting mentions. At least 2 of them are very likely to be completely false. Like Josephus, the Testimonium Flavianum there is probably a fake. Is quite. I'm fairly confident it is a fake.
Right. So one second. So Socrates' dates.
Okay.
Because you're just ignoring the point that I've made. You've literally sat there and ignored it. No, but then you totally everything you've said just ignored the point, bro. It's frustrating. I'll say it again. Right. So these are the dates. These are the dates of Socrates.
Okay.
Tiny snippets.
Oh, he's just off on a script.
So are the dates for Socrates?
So the dates for Socrates are
okay, so what does it say?
470 to 399. Plato's dates are 428 to 348. So Plato is considered a student of Socrates. Okay.
So he was
now the thing is, the only way that I'm talking to the camera now, because you're just not listening. The only way that we know that Socrates lived is because Plato wrote about him. That's the criteria that this Gnostic brother has set up. Someone wrote about him. His students wrote about him. Okay, but one second. But the apostles are the students of their rabbi Jesus, and they wrote about Jesus. They spoke about Jesus. Their community was founded because of Jesus. I want to ask this Gnostic, who's not a Christian, though he's going by the name of Christian. So I want. There's no such thing as a Gnostic Christian. So there's.
No way.
So I want to ask you.
Ask him again, Bob.
I'm going to try and change the question because you've not
engaging.
dealt with the.
He's not engaging, Bob.
But the point is the fundamental argument is about whether Jesus is real. The fundamental question is whether Jesus was a real person.
Okay.
If Jesus was a real person, then your whole view of history is wrong. Agreed? If Jesus is a real person, is your view of history wrong?
Can I want to qualify this quickly, but by saying, look, there were quite a few Jesuses in the 1st century.
I'm talking about the Jesus of Nazareth, the Jesus of Christianity, that Jesus. The one
Messiah,
that was crucified and rose again on the 3rd day, that Jesus.
Yes.
That's the Jesus I'm talking about.
I believe.
So I want to ask you,
Yes.
if that Jesus lived, is your view of history wrong?
Yes or no?
No, because I believe that there was a Jesus that existed and lived. He came to the history of that guy came to a crescendo in the 68 to 70 AD with the destruction of the Second Temple. His name was Isa. His name was also Manu. his name was Emmanuel, right? And he was a very important historical figure as well.
Right. So what you're saying is, so let's just deal with what you've said. What you've said was, one second.
I really need to.
No, I want to
deal.
I want to deal with what you're saying. You're saying that there was a real.
If I could just say my piece.
Yeah, go on, finish your point, and then I'll reply.
Yeah.
So this figure was absolutely within the existing historical record. There's a few mentions of him in the Antiquities of the Jews from Flavius. There's also mention of him in the Talmud. He goes by a few different names, but one of his names is Isus ben Gomara, and he was also called Manu. They had personal names. There were also king's names.
Right, bro. What is the point you're making?
Round it up.
You said this was a sentence, not a paragraph.
Yeah.
And that some of the books in the Bible actually reference this Christ.
Okay. So what is the point that you're making, bro? Because
I'm trying to say this guy was the head of the leader of the Jewish rebellion under Titus at the time.
Right.
Very interesting history.
So you're saying that he was a rebel leading the Jewish rebellion, the revolt of 70 AD. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Stop. Right.
All right,
One second.
You made your
So
point.
you've made your point. Now I'm going to talk to the camera because I know that there isn't any point talking to you. You'll just talk over me if I do.
Bob.
So the point that the brother is making is that the real Jesus of history, was the one that led the Jewish revolt that happened in 70 AD. Now the obvious question is, how does he know that? What are his sources? What method of historical inquiry has he used to get that? And now when we try to explore this, which I would like to pin him down on, what is his criteria of understanding history, what you're going to see is the inconsistencies of his logic, because he will establish a criteria which I will then use to prove my Jesus is the real Jesus.
Yeah.
But then he will dismiss his own criteria when it works against him. So my question to you now,
What's the question, Bob?
My question to you now is, what historical evidence and what criteria are you using to say that this Jesus from 70 AD is the one who led the Jewish revolt? What's firstly, let's just split that question into two.
Yeah.
Firstly, your evidences, your sources,
Yes.
and then secondly, your way of scrutinizing those sources. So what, firstly, are your sources that talk about Jesus leading the Jewish revolt, the Jesus of the Gospels leading the Jewish revolt?
I think they're actually in the Bible themselves. If you look at the Bible, you'll see references to this Christ, and they're quite categorical, they're quite clear.
So to be clear, your evidence is the Bible.
Yeah,
The
he said that.
Because there are certainly stories within the Bible that correlate very nicely to this history, and there's the 3-day, the crucifixion as well, actually, and you can look at. I just want to say, so the Antiquities of the Jews and the history, the Jewish history.
Wait, you mentioned another source. The Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus. Right, so we've got the Bible and the Antiquities of the Jews.
Yes,
right.
two sources.
Yep. We got the Talmud.
We have
Talmud, the Bible,
we
and
have
three sources.
People like Moses of Qur'an.
So Moses of Karim. So the Gospels, the Antiquities of Josephus, the Talmud, and
this one,
what was the
last
other
one? The Moses something.
Moses of Karim.
Yeah.
So wait one second. Now, I just want to. You've named your sources.
Sure. Can I just add?
Yep.
There's a lot of archaeological evidence as well for this Jesus, in the form of coins, in the form of statues, in the form of his household being
fantastic, brilliant.
Cool.
There's archaeological evidence in the form of coins and the form of statues. Now, I just want to point out something that this brother does know, but this is what I said. now he's mentioned his evidences, you're going to see how he will pick and choose. Because Josephus, in Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 3, Part 3, and in Book 20, Chapter 9, Part 1. This is Josephus in the Jewish Antiquities. He mentioned it as a source, states this about Jesus Christ.
What does it say, Bob?
That he was a miracle worker, that he was a teacher, that he had Jewish and Gentile followers, that he was called Christ, that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and that one of his leading followers, the leading Jew, stoned James and accused him of being a breaker of the law. Now watch as he just chucks Josephus under the bus. Josephus said that Christ was crucified.
No problem. I like Josephus as an historian.
But
I've read many passages of Josephus. But
there you go.
Everyone listening at home, I think that it's very possible that some of that testimony, because the testimony of Flaviarum, I think it's called, it's a very important testimony from Josephus. It's not contemporary with Jesus Christ, but it names perfectly what anyone would want to know about Jesus Christ in a fairly small passage. Here's the clincher: it's probably a fake. It's probably not true.
But you just quoted it as evidence.
No.
You said it was a source of evidence.
I quote Josephus as evidence, because you can do that with Josephus. A lot of his history is a bang on the money. Right?
What is the evidence of? The Jesus you believe in?
Sorry?
The Jesus you believe in?
It's not coronavirus.
Hey, some water there next to you, bro.
I've got back off.
It's all right.
No, have some water there. Hey, have some water.
It's probably just a hay fever.
Yeah, sure. So, and people can do their own research on this, but that testimony is probably not fair, and it's the first time it's used in.
So it's evidence until it contradicts you, is what you're saying?
No, I'm saying
it's evidence, but it's not evidence if it contradicts your
It's
words.
unlikely that Josephus would use the terminology Christ, because he was a Jew. He was a Jewish
He said
guy.
that Christ was crucified. Was Christ crucified?
I believe, can I say, the Isus Ben Gamala, he was crucified.
Was he crucified under Pontius Pilate?
He was one of the, not under Pontius Pilate, under
So Josephus was wrong.
In this, as I'm saying, I don't fully believe the testimony is true.
So my point is that as I said he would, exactly as I said he would, he mentioned his evidences and then throws them away when it contradicts his worldview. Now you mentioned the Bible.
Yeah, he mentioned the Bible, Bob.
You mentioned the Bible. By the way, what I'm using is a redacted conclusion from Josephus. So I'm using what's considered to be a redacted version based upon your argument about it being edited by later writers. So the Gospel of Mark, which is our earliest Gospel, now bearing in mind that his own criteria was that it has to be written by someone within their own lifetime, but yet when it came to Socrates, he took that principle away. Yeah, because Socrates, no one wrote about Socrates in Socrates' lifetime. No one. Incidentally, no one wrote about Plato in Plato's lifetime. Just saying. So by his logic, he can't substantiate Socrates or Plato, except that he said when someone writes about them, that makes them a real person in history. Even though I have seven people that all write about Jesus, but still he's not a real person in history.
He was alive.
Now,
at the time, and he was
the Gospel of
touching people and curing them with blindness.
1 second, brother.
You know, he was changing
brother,
into many more lives.
Brother,
and we don't have any of that
in the Gospel of Mark, it says this: then they brought him to the place of Golgotha, which is translated place of the skull. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. So the Gospel of Mark is saying that Jesus was crucified. Was there a real person called Jesus crucified that Mark is speaking of?
Jesus Ben Gamala was crucified, and it was as a result of the Jews failing to oust Rome.
Can you show me in this? Here's my Bible. Can you show me in my Bible, which you said was evidence?
Oh yeah.
Can you identify Jesus of Gamala?
Certain passages are definitely evidence of some pretty profound cool stuff.
No, bro.
That's why I like reading the Bible.
You have a worldview that when tested collapses. questions, which I think is the reason why you don't hear my questions.
Right.
So here's my question.
Listen,
Okay?
listen.
You're saying that the real Jesus of history was the Jesus of the Jewish Revolt in 70 AD, correct?
Yeah,
right.
yeah, I think
The
that's
Gospel of Mark was written in 40 AD before the rebellion.
It wasn't
Can
written
you
in-
identify? One second.
It wasn't written.
All right, we'll come back to that. But can you show to me?
That's not true.
Can you? That's your belief. Can you show to me that the Jesus that you're talking about is referenced in the Gospel of Mark? There you go.
Yeah, show us.
Show me
I
where.
don't know what I'm looking for. What I'm trying to tell you, what I'm trying to say is.
No, my question. I'll be clear about my question because you have a tendency to waffle off the point. The question I'm asking you is: you're saying you said that the Bible is evidence.
Yeah.
You said that the real Jesus is Jesus Gamala, I think you said.
Jesus
right?
Gamala, yeah.
Ben Gamala.
Ben
So
Gamala.
identify to me in the New Testament Jesus Ben Gamala.
Yes.
Show me.
The father really.
There are aspects, and I can definitely go home. We can do this again, and I can bring some real research.
So there
this
are
time.
some verses
I
you can pick and
I didn't
choose.
Come
Okay.
expecting to do this today, but my point here is. That there is a lot more evidence for Jesus if you just move
No,
things
Jesus got Ben Gamala.
Gamala.
You said that
Yeah.
he's the one talked about here. Show me.
And
Yes,
Manu,
yes, you
show
said
me.
that. You said that. Yes.
Show me.
Show us.
The name Manu.
No, show me.
It references.
No, no, no.
Show me. Show me that name and
Stop
show me that
dancing,
name.
stop
You
dancing.
can't find it unless you
Stop
read
dancing.
between the text.
Ah, there you go. Did you hear that?
Oh.
And that's the problem with the Gnostics.
What did he say? Sorry,
He
Rob.
said,
talking
right, he
about-
said, you can't find it unless you read between the text.
Ah.
In other words, the
then
words
to
that
read
are
this,
there,
find the
the words that are there
Yeah.
are not really the words that are there. It's the words between the lines.
Ah, between the lines.
That are the
Okay.
words that you have to believe in. In other words, the
Yeah.
words that I put in to it. That's the whole problem with Gnosticism,
Wow.
is that it literally just invents whatever it wants
no,
and
no.
then forces it into the text.
What we
Show me,
do is
show
we
me,
look-
show me, show me Jesus Ben Gamala in that text.
Yeah, show us.
Or just say you can't.
Yeah.
You have names for that.
Can you do it?
You haven't got the Bengamala because what this book is a teaching.
Are you saying you can't?
Of parable.
Are you
Ah.
saying that you can't?
Ah, so you
Are
can't
you
find
saying
it.
that you
can't
can't?
find it.
Mythology.
Are you saying that you can't?
Jesus' character.
Are you saying that you can't?
Ah, so you can't find it.
Are you saying you can't?
You can find
Ah, you can find it.
aspects. Can I say
Aspects.
this is important?
Okay.
Because
Okay.
this is true.
I'll have it back.
You can find aspects of this guy, Jesus Christ.
we can find what his real name was.
in the historical record, but you have to change the dates a bit. And this is real scholarship these days. People are saying that the Romans had much more of a.
This is not real scholarship.
an
Bart
emphasis.
Ehrman disagrees with this.
Uh,
Dr. Bruce Metzger
Bart
disagrees with
Ehrman's
this.
not,
Dr.
you
Daniel
won't
Wallace
touch
disagrees with this.
People like Richard
Dr.
Carrier. He
Dr.
doesn't
Who's that
argue with
historian?
people like
Dr.
Richard
Mike
Carrier.
Lacona disagrees with this. Dr. N.T. Wright disagrees with this. His claim that this is real scholarship is a complete rhetorical device. Every real scholar on this topic will say that this man, no offense Christian, is speaking nonsense and that the real Jesus was crucified in history. He was a rabbi who believed himself to be the Messiah, who went around thinking that he was Messiah, and his followers believed that he had risen from the dead.
When
Yeah.
you're looking in-
Okay, get the circle, get the chat.
Yeah, but you just said that the real words of the Bible are not the ones we need to follow. It's the words between the words.
Ah, between the lines.
That's what you said.
Jesus
So
himself
you've got
says-
no claim to history now.
What Jesus
Ah.
himself says to the disciples. Why? And one of the, I think Mark might he asks. One of them asks, "Why doth thou speak in parables?" And Jesus says, "Well, yes, I will speak in parables."
But Jesus
This
say
is
those
for-
words?
This is
Did
for-
Jesus say those words?
He says it much better than I do.
Did
yeah.
Jesus? So
Yes,
he did
does.
say words, and they are recorded in the
And
gospel.
When I speak of Jesus Christ, I'm speaking of
But
as far
listen,
as I can
Christian,
see, a mythological figure
Christian, listen
who
to
says
what you've
very
just
wise
done.
things.
Christian, listen to what you've
Just
just
Listen,
done.
listen.
Apollo,
Christian, listen to what you've done. You've just said that Jesus did say words.
Yeah, in the Bible.
And that they are recorded in the gospel.
Yeah, he
but
said
then
that.
when the gospel contradicts your worldview, then you're saying, well, we don't believe what the gospels say.
The gospels say, why, remember, why
Coronavirus
dost
brought
thou
us to the
speak
park.
to
It's
these
been normally
people?
out there, but now we're
The
like here.
literalist interpretation of the
I don't know
Bible.
if it's still
Yes,
tasty.
everything is true. Jesus Christ was a man who was also a God.
Okay, Oh.
That stuff I
So,
don't
yeah,
believe.
good man.
Christian,
But
you have
here's the thing, when
you have
get
no
behind a lot of the-
behind. By what criteria can we look behind the evidence?
Well, you've got to think more.
You've got to think.
More of a spiritual.
You've got to think in a more spiritual way.
Archetypal.
You've got to
way
think in a more
for-
so
for a
so
lot of
he's
these.
so Christian's logic is this.
Okay.
That to see the truth behind the evidence,
Okay.
we have to think in a more spiritual, archetypal way. You know what I heard was? We know what I heard? I heard subjective belief, subjective belief, subjective belief.
Ah.
That's what I heard.
Okay.
In other words, what I heard was,
Yeah.
if I like the evidence, it's true. If I don't like the evidence, it's false. And we've got to think in a spiritual, archetypal way.
There were
Ah.
numerous
So when
ways.
Jesus taught in parables, according to the gospel,
Yeah.
he believes it.
Okay.
But when those same gospels say that Jesus was crucified, he doesn't believe it and says we have to think in a more spiritual, more archetypal, more archetypal way.
Yeah.
No, and
Okay.
then
That's
understanding
Can you
the
not see why-
crucifixion or being the idea that
Inconsistent.
we are all
Can you
crucified
not
on
see
the-
why that is such an inconsistent way of thinking?
Yeah.
It's not.
Can you see why that's an
It's
inconsistent
not
way of
at
thinking?
all.
Tell him,
As I
tell him,
said to
Bob.
you, what I don't believe is the historical, mythological, miracle-making Christ.
Brother, let go of your
Okay?
pride.
I don't
Yeah.
believe that stuff because, as I said, there's no contemporaneous evidence that happened at all.
Brother,
And
let
there's
go
no
of your
Roman
pride.
evidence as well. That
Let
attests to
go
that
of your
history.
pride.
And
Yeah, let
Romans
go,
were
let go.
They did.
Let
They
go of your
liked it. They
pride,
were
bro.
pretty
Yeah.
litigious people.
You have not
You know?
discovered
Now,
new knowledge. One second, I'm just gonna talk over you if you try to talk over me.
I haven't
So-
been able to
so-
talk as much as you.
so-
but
so-
just can you'll be able to see.
Yeah, but that's people can make their own decision. You have just said that there's no contemporaneous evidence.
Yeah.
There is none.
You have just said that there is no Roman evidence. Let's apply his criteria to Socrates and Plato.
Okay.
There is no contemporaneous evidence and there is no
There is
Roman
more.
evidence. Does Plato and
More
Socrates
evidence.
live?
Yeah. Answer.
Did Plato and Socrates? There you
I
go.
believe that they did.
So he has
And-
one
and
criteria
I
for Plato and
believe that the
Socrates
evidence
and a
that
different
those guys have
criteria
existed
for
is
Jesus.
far more-
Now, as you can see, guys, I have to speak to the camera because when I try to make a point to him, he just
Yeah.
talks over me.
There's a big block.
Yeah, and that's fine. This is Speaker's Corner. He can do that if he wants to.
Alright.
But it just means that you can't. If a
Engage.
cup is full, you can't pour anything into it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like his cup is overflowing, but not in the
Yeah.
good way. Like the point that we're making. Notice he quoted the Gospels as proving that Jesus spoke in parables.
Yeah,
Right?
that
But
is a
those
great-
same Gospels
great,
say that Jesus worked miracles, that he was crucified, and that he rose from the dead. So when it says that Jesus spoke in parables, he believes the Gospels. When it says that that same Jesus performed miracles and
say
was
I did
crucified
not
and was
believe.
risen from the dead, he doesn't believe in it.
There are many.
Now he
things
then
that
goes
we
on to
do
say, in his argument, that the real Jesus is the one from 70 AD. But the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke, and the Gospel of Matthew were all written before 70 AD. That's the problem that this man has. He's using as evidence, selectively, in a very picky way, evidence to say that this is Jesus, Bar, whatever, Gollum. Yeah, this rebel. And I believe there probably was a Jesus who was leader of a Jewish rebellion. I'm completely fine with that. Yeshua was a common name.
It's a good
Incidentally, not Isa was Yeshua. But the fact of the matter is, he has got no evidence that these Gospels were written after 70
Can I quote
AD.
Jesus for a sec?
After 70
Can I
AD.
quote Jesus?
After 70 AD, the Jewish temple was destroyed. This was the biggest event in the Jewish world. Do you honestly believe that any Jewish author would not write about the destruction of the temple if it had occurred? And yet Luke doesn't mention it in Acts. He doesn't mention it in his gospel. Neither does Mark, neither does Matthew, neither does John. If the Jewish temple was destroyed and these were written after 70 AD, they would have incorporated it into the story.
You can't
Now,
date any
my,
of the
my
Gospels
question to you,
to
Christian,
the 1st century.
actually they're all dated to the 1st century.
you
They
can't-
are all
you
dated to
can't-
the 1st century.
With any kind of scientific rigor, look to
With
the,
historical rigor, you can.
Yeah, you
You can
can't-
with historical
You
rigor.
can talk about Paul's epistles, and that's fine. You can't.
Were Paul's epistles written
with
before
the-
70 AD?
I think they give you a window with historic what's carbon dating and so on.
No, my question
and
is-
the window falls
No, you know,
around-
I'm just gonna show Christian now. He's just made something up on the spot. Did you hear that?
No.
He said
no,
carbon
I knew
dating.
this.
Yeah,
The
Yes,
fact of the matter
with
is we
carbon
don't have
dating-
any of the original autographs to carbon date. So he
have
literally just made
have
something up to
nothing.
try and
We
sustain
have
his
less than
worldview.
that. We
Okay.
have fragments.
We don't
Yeah,
have
I
any
don't.
of the original
Yes, we do.
autographs. No, we don't. There's not a
autographs, no.
single surviving
There are-
original
there are-
autograph.
Yes, there are. Within the 1st century, there are shards of
Wait a minute.
scripture
Just-
from the
Shards.
1st.
Wait,
sorry,
hold
the
on.
2nd
Ah,
century.
Oh, the 2nd century.
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
You
Right.
get
Those are
confused,
not
zeros and
original.
ones,
There are
right?
not original
Can I
autographs.
just quote Jesus to everyone?
About
This is Genesis 13. Let me see. I'm going to go to 13:10.
So you're quoting
So
Genesis
Matthew.
as a quotation of Jesus?
Matthew. The disciples came to him and asked,
What
"Why
what
do
passage,
you
sorry?
speak to people in parables?"
Matthew.
This is Matthew 13:10.
Yep.
And I'm going to read 10 and 11 to you. Why do you speak to the people in parables? I'm going to go to 11. Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them.
Yep. So
this
you
is-
so you accept the Gospels there as proof that Jesus spoke in parables.
Okay.
Yeah, well, they are parables.
Does Matthew say
They're
that Christ was
parables if
crucified?
Mithra said
That-
them.
Does
They're
does
parables
does
in-
Matthew say that Christ was crucified?
Yeah.
So when you quote Matthew to say that Christ spoke in parables and you believe it, right?
Christ spoke. I don't believe that the Christ, it's possible that the
So
Christ
did this
I
Christ
believe in
of
history
Matthew speak in parables?
Said this stuff, right?
Did the-
but
did the
there's
Christ-
enough of a difference that there are different stories. Obviously, when you look at the history of the
Don't-
Jesus I'm talking
don't-
about
don't let us-
versus the
But
the
Christian,
mythological
listen to yourself.
Christ, right?
Listen to yourself.
I don't believe a lot of that stuff happened. It would be
the
wonderful if you did.
history of Jesus, but you don't know anything about this Jesus.
Read the Bible.
There you go. He's
I've read
saying
the
that I read the Bible
I've read the
and that's
Bible.
proof
I've read
of
the
the
Bible.
Jesus he believes
And
in.
it's a
Yeah, he
good
said
story.
But the
Set of
Jesus
stories.
that the Bibles talk about is one that was crucified,
Yeah.
and he's denying the crucifixion.
I'm denying the 3 days in the tomb and the resurrection.
You can sit next once this guy's done.
Because the resurrected sun gods are all over the pagan past.
Example.
Yeah.
I want an example of a sun god that was crucified and rose from the dead.
Osiris.
Osiris wasn't crucified, and he didn't rise
Their
from the dead.
understanding of crucified.
He didn't- he wasn't
Crucifixion is
crucified.
different from ours. See, Horus
What do you mean?
was
No, it
crucified.
isn't. That's a lie.
Horus was
I'm going to stand up because he's standing up.
Come on.
On the cross.
Bro.
And the cross here is this astrological.
Hold on one
it's a-
second. You've just said that their
perfectly-
understanding of crucifixion was different from our understanding of
Yeah,
crucifixion.
he said that.
You have literally
Yeah.
just made something up.
On the spot again.
No.
You've just made something up. The Romans were very clear about what crucifixion was. They executed by crucifixion tens of thousands of people.
All the
I
time.
understand.
Like the rebellion,
Was it not the
like the rebellion of Spartacus. Tens of
yeah.
thousands of slaves were crucified.
Absolutely.
After, I'm waiting for someone to say it.
I'm miming it.
All right, like you missed a great opportunity, guys. I'm Spartacus. But the point is, the Romans were very clear about what crucifixion was. It was a form of execution for criminals.
Yeah.
So when it talks about crucifixion in the
they-
Gospels,
Wait,
that is
wait.
what they meant by crucifixion.
Crucifixion, that's it.
That's what they meant.
crucified that Christ, the Christ I was talking about as well. You know, Joseph of Arimathea, whose real name is quite probably in history Joseph Bar Matthäus.
You say that. Why do you say that?
And that's Josephus,
Why do you say that?
because it might well be historical.
So you've used
Let me
Josephus,
come
the
back
same
with a few.
Josephus that said that Christ was
Was
crucified
crucified.
under Pontius Pilate.
Right, which I don't believe, by the
There
way.
you go.
Ah.
So you're just picking and choosing your
Josephus to
evidence.
be-
Wow.
I'm not. I believe that
Wasn't
Josephus
Muslim.
wrote good things and that he
Wasn't
wrote
Muslim.
utter lies for the Roman
Gnostic text,
court.
yeah.
For
Based up
Titus.
only on your criteria of
What?
we have to think in a
Yeah.
spiritual an
sure.
archetypal way.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
guy was a turncoat. Historically, it's true.
I know that.
He became a turncoat.
But
and
the
what
point is,
I believe is Paul
You-
is
you-
actually basically
you-
Josephus. I think they're the
Paul
same
is
person.
Josephus.
Wow.
Whoa! Oh my God!
You just said I can
Paul
go a
was
long way to
Josephus.
proving that.
Wow.
Right, now
Wait,
I
do we
know
want-
that
should
I'm
we do
dealing with a
part two
guy
next week?
who's
Do you
We'll
just.
want
all
to
over
do a
the
part
place.
2 next week?
Yeah, we'll do a part 2 next week. Please bring your evidence
I'll
that
bring
Paul
my
is
If you
Josephus.
can, if you
I'll
can.
remember
If
to
you
bring
can,
my
bring your
Please
evidence.
bring your right. That's
There's quite a lot.
That's the challenge.
debate
I
next
love-
week is that this
Ask
brother,
people to bring.
Yeah.
this
Name?
poor brother,
Shit, yeah.
is going to bring me evidence that Paul was Josephus.
It's a good theory.
Okay.
It is a
It's
terrible
got-
theory.
It's got some good
Christian,
historicity to it.
as you go,
It's been a pleasure.
Christian, we're not yet. I'm done. We will say goodbye, but I want to say to something
Come on,
to
Bob.
you, and I want to say it in the nicest possible way. But you have not discovered any secret knowledge.
I think I have.
You, on the contrary, you have filled your mind with rubbish, literally rubbish, and you are wasting the
Valuable time.
opportunity to know the real Jesus
Yeah.
because you want to make yourself special because you've discovered some secret
I've got
knowledge
that
that
secret
no
history
one
stuff.
else knows.
Ah.
Not the people that were
The
writing
real-
at the
the
time.
real Christos, the real
not
Christ within you.
not any of the historians
Very
that
good.
have got PhDs in this. Not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or Paul, who was Josephus. It's just Christian here
The
in the
power behind
21st
the sun.
century.
Talking nonsense.
It's worse than Muhammad. 2,100 years later, in another country,
Yeah, yeah.
speaking another language, and he knows the real events of history
Ah.
based upon the odd verses that he'll quote and accept from this book,
Give it to
while ignoring all the other ones.
Ah, okay. So he's a new
Christian,
prophet.
let go of this rubbish, man. We'll get to know the real
I
Jesus.
love that too.
All right. Take care. God bless.